The Galactic Council was gathered in the Grand Hall of the Xeric Station, an enormous space station that floated in the middle of the sector. It was a place where the greatest empires in the galaxy came together to discuss trade, security, and sometimes the future of entire star systems. Today, however, the room was filled with laughter and ridicule. At the center of attention was a fleet, an oddly small one. While most of the council members were used to seeing massive, heavily armed warships, this fleet was nothing like that. There were only 5 ships, each no larger than a standard cargo vessel. Their sleek, unadorned surfaces were nothing special. They were a stark contrast to the massive fleets of the larger empires, which boasted powerful weapons and nearly impenetrable shields. The council's leaders, most of whom were from the largest and most powerful empires, couldn't stop laughing. Some of the lesser-known species, who had made their names through diplomacy, were already betting on the outcome of the upcoming meeting. "This is it. This is the fleet everyone is talking about," said the Xeric representative, a tall, armored being with glowing purple eyes. "A handful of ships. How quaint." The laughing spread like wildfire around the room. The mighty Galactic Empire, the Yorn Dominion, and the tech-savvy Hydrax Collective were all present. They exchanged mocking glances and chuckles. "I'd say we could take these down with a single cruiser," a representative from the Yorn Dominion said with a smirk. "No need for anything special. Just a few well-placed shots, and those ships will be space debris." Others agreed, but they weren't just mocking the fleet. They were mocking the very idea of a fleet like this existing in their galaxy. The beings in the room had no idea what kind of race or faction would be brave, or foolish, enough to send such a tiny group of ships into the galactic arena. "How do we even know who built them?" asked a representative from the Hydrax Collective, tapping a button on his console. The question was directed to the fleet's supposed creators. No one knew who they were, or where they came from. The tiny ships had simply appeared, floating in space like quiet sentinels. The room grew quieter as data began to stream across the holoscreen. The ships were identified as human-made, but that didn't mean anything to most of the council members. The humans, or Earthlings, as some called them, were an afterthought in the vast, complex galaxy. Few had seen them, and even fewer had bothered to learn about them. They were seen as a primitive species, trapped on a single planet, with no technology or resources to make a dent in the grand galactic picture. "Humans," the Xeric representative's voice dripped with disbelief. "This is their fleet. These are the ones who've been so bold as to claim a stake in our sector." The screen blinked, showing a single line of text. "Human-made ships detected in galactic space, Sector 4732. It was a small message that didn't even come close to explaining why such a fleet had appeared. The council was bewildered, unable to fathom that humanity could create something like this. "Perhaps it's some sort of misunderstanding," suggested a quiet voice from the back of the room. "Maybe they're just lost, or maybe they found some old ships lying around. They've been isolated for so long, they must be out of touch with real galactic powers." A few other members nodded, clearly in agreement. But even as they spoke, the fleet was visible in the star system scans, anchored at the far edge of the sector. It wasn't moving, but it wasn't retreating either. "Their fleet doesn't even have a proper name," the Yorn representative scoffed. "How could they possibly think they're a threat?" "Maybe they're just trying to play diplomat," suggested another, though her tone was laced with sarcasm. "Trying to join the big leagues with their little ships." Laughter echoed through the council chambers, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity. How could such a small fleet possibly survive in a galaxy dominated by massive, powerful empires? And yet, they had made their presence known. It wasn't enough to demand respect, but it was enough to draw attention. Something that most small civilizations would never dream of doing. "Let's put an end to this joke," the Xeric representative finally said, his voice firm. "We'll send a scout fleet to investigate. Maybe we can find out what these humans are really about." With that, the council settled into a brief silence, but the skepticism remained. No one thought that these tiny ships could be a real challenge. After all, this was the Galactic Council, the most powerful entities in the galaxy. There was no way a small fleet like this could stand against them. But as the laughter died down and the meeting proceeded, something in the back of each leader's mind began to stir. The tiny fleet may have seemed like a joke, but perhaps, just perhaps, the humans were hiding something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. The Galactic Council may have laughed at the tiny fleet, but they soon found that their amusement was short-lived. Just hours after the meeting, the Xeric representatives' words began to echo in their minds. Let's put an end to this joke. But no one could have predicted what would happen next. The scout fleet that the Xeric representative had ordered was one of the best in the sector. A squadron of 5 highly trained ships from the Xeric Empire, each one equipped with the latest stealth technology and powerful weapons, was sent out to investigate the human fleet. They moved with precision, slipping into the sector where the tiny fleet was stationed, expecting to overpower it easily. It was supposed to be a simple mission: find the human ships and either destroy them or force them to retreat. But when the scout fleet entered the humans' claimed space, things didn't go as planned. The Xeric ships were fast and efficient, yet something felt off. The small human fleet, no larger than a few cargo ships, didn't seem to notice them at first. It was almost too quiet. There were no energy signatures, no defense systems, nothing. The scout fleet moved closer, eager to complete their mission, but it didn't take long before things started to go wrong. A sharp ping echoed through the Xeric commander's ship, a small, quiet signal that was hard to detect, even harder to trace. The commander, an experienced officer, frowned. What was that? He signaled his crew to check the readings again. They could find no sign of any ships around them. The human fleet was still there, supposedly in front of them, but none of their sensors were picking anything up. It was as if the fleet had disappeared. The commander ordered a scan of the area, but when the readings came through, they were completely distorted. His ship was caught in an energy field of sorts, one so powerful it was scrambling their sensors. It didn't make sense. No known race had the ability to create such an effective disruption at such close range. The Xeric commander pushed forward, determined not to let the strange phenomenon stop him. "We must proceed," he said, as the rest of the scout fleet followed in line behind him. But then, without warning, a massive burst of energy shot out from the human fleet. It wasn't a weapon, not exactly, but it was enough to send the entire scout fleet into a state of confusion. Ships started losing power. Lights flickered and went out. The Xeric crews could only watch helplessly as their once stealthy fleet began to break apart. Without firing a single shot, the tiny human ships had already rendered them helpless. The commander tried to call for backup, but his communications were jammed. Every effort to send a distress signal or even retreat was futile. The human fleet wasn't just hiding or waiting for them. They were controlling the battlefield, and they did it without lifting a finger. "Status report," the Xeric commander shouted as his crew scrambled to understand what was happening. "We can't move, sir. Our systems are locked," came the reply from one of the technicians. "It's like they've taken over our ship. We can't even fire our weapons." The Xeric ships were stuck, frozen in space, unable to escape. They were sitting ducks in the vast emptiness of space, their fate sealed by the very fleet they had been sent to destroy. The tiny human ships, barely visible on their sensors, were moving in perfect coordination. They hadn't fired a single shot, yet the Xeric fleet was incapacitated in moments. It was as if the humans knew exactly what they were doing. The Xeric commander felt a cold shiver run down his spine. How could this be possible? Meanwhile, on the human ships, things were eerily calm. The human fleet didn't move quickly, didn't engage in unnecessary action. They simply hovered, watching the scene unfold before them. Every move the Xeric fleet made was anticipated, every attempt to escape countered with effortless precision. One of the human ships, the largest among the fleet, sent out a single communication. It wasn't a threat, nor a demand. It was simply a message. We've given you a chance to retreat. Leave, and there will be no further need for hostility. Stay, and we will show you how serious we are. The Xeric commander, stunned and unwilling to admit defeat, refused to back down. We do not surrender. Prepare to retaliate, he ordered. But no retaliation came. Instead, the tiny human ships sent another wave of energy through the area, this time targeting the Xeric fleet's engines. It was as if they were using some sort of technology that allowed them to not only disable their enemy ships, but also redirect their power back into the surrounding space. The Xeric fleet was completely paralyzed, unable to move, unable to communicate, and most importantly, unable to fight back. After what felt like an eternity, the Xeric commander gave the order to retreat, though he knew there was no real way to escape. The human ships slowly pulled back, allowing the scout fleet to limp away. The commander had never felt such a sense of helplessness in his entire career. They were defeated, and they had no idea how or why. The small fleet, once the subject of ridicule, had now become an impossible mystery. Something more than just their ships had been at work. Something about their technology was far beyond anything the Council had ever imagined. As the retreating Xeric ships disappeared into the vastness of space, one thought lingered in the minds of all those who had witnessed the event. The humans were not to be underestimated. The Xeric retreat didn't go unnoticed. Word of the small fleet's mysterious victory spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The Galactic Council, which had mocked the human ships only days before, now found themselves grappling with a question they could not ignore. What was humanity really capable of? On Xeric Station, a special emergency meeting was called. The council members, once filled with arrogance and confidence, now sat with grim expressions. The once laughable tiny fleet was no longer a joke. The reality of the situation was clear. The humans had proven that their technology was far beyond what anyone had imagined. But the big question remained: how had they done it? The scout fleet was incapacitated without a single shot fired, the Xeric representative said, his voice low. We need to know how, and we need to know now. The room fell silent. For the first time in years, the mighty Galactic Council was worried. The largest and most powerful empires in the galaxy had faced many threats, but this was something new. A representative from the Hydrax Collective spoke up. We should not underestimate them. Their technology is unlike anything we've encountered before, but it is not just their weapons. Their strategy. He paused, choosing his words carefully. It was too precise, too coordinated. Whoever is commanding those ships is not just some primitive race. The Xeric representative scoffed. They are primitive. It's impossible to believe that such a small, backward species could pose a real threat. The Yorn representative raised an eyebrow. You saw what happened to your fleet, didn't you? They crippled you without lifting a finger. I'd say it's very possible. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. The truth was, none of them had ever thought much of humanity. They were a species from a tiny, forgotten planet. Earth, as it was called, was so far from the center of galactic power that it might as well have been on the other side of the universe. Yet here they were, facing a fleet of ships that had just embarrassed some of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. Perhaps we should speak with the humans, the Hydrax representative suggested, looking around the room. We need to understand what they want. If they are capable of this, we cannot afford to ignore them. The council hesitated. Despite their fear, no one wanted to admit that they had underestimated the humans, but the idea of meeting with them made the most sense. The tiny fleet wasn't just a curiosity anymore, it was a warning. A warning that the galaxy's power dynamics could be shifting in ways no one had anticipated. Meanwhile, aboard one of the human ships, the crew was silent. The mission had been successful, but no one was celebrating. The fleet's commander, a human named Captain Jace Carter, stood on the bridge, staring out into the void of space. His mind was racing, processing everything that had just happened. It had been a simple plan, really. The humans had designed their fleet with one primary purpose: to be unnoticed. Their ships were small, compact, and unassuming. They weren't meant to intimidate or strike fear into anyone. They were designed to blend in and avoid detection. But when the Xeric scout fleet had moved in, they had unknowingly triggered something that had been carefully hidden. The human fleet's technology wasn't just about stealth. It was about control. Control over the environment, control over energy systems, control over everything. Captain Carter knew that the technology they had was far more advanced than anyone could have imagined. But how had it been developed? And more importantly, how had humanity managed to keep it a secret for so long? The answer, he realized, was simple. No one had known about it until now. Captain Carter had been briefed on the technology during his training, but even he hadn't understood the full extent of its capabilities until that moment. Humanity had kept their advancements hidden, working in the shadows of the galaxy. But that was about to change. They had made their mark, and there was no going back. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime. The comm officer spoke up. "Captain, we've just received a message from the Galactic Council." Carter didn't flinch. He had been expecting this. It was time. The Council wanted answers, and they were going to get them. "Patch it through," he ordered. A holographic image flickered to life in front of him. The Xeric representative appeared, his expression stern. "Human Commander, we request a meeting with you. It is clear that your fleet possesses technology far beyond anything we have encountered. We need to understand your intentions." Carter nodded, though he kept his expression neutral. "You'll have your answers," he said calmly. "But understand this. Humanity is not here to bow to anyone. We have our own place in this galaxy, and we are not afraid to defend it." The Xeric representative's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing in response. The message ended, and the comm officer looked at Carter expectantly. "It's time," Carter said, turning back to the crew. "Prepare for the meeting." The crew immediately began to make preparations for the Council's request. As they readied the ship, Carter found himself reflecting on what had just transpired. They had made an impression, and now the galaxy knew that humanity was no longer a hidden, insignificant species. The tiny fleet had shaken the foundations of the Galactic Council. But one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. The human fleet moved slowly through the vast emptiness of space, heading toward the designated meeting point with the Galactic Council. Captain Jace Carter stood on the bridge of the flagship, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared at the stars outside. The silence around him was almost deafening, but it wasn't the usual calm. There was tension in the air. The Council's request for a meeting wasn't surprising, but the human fleet's position had changed. What had once been a small, secretive force was now becoming the center of galactic attention. Every move they made would be watched, analyzed, and scrutinized. And Carter knew that. "I've never seen the crew this quiet," Lieutenant Harris said, stepping up beside Carter. "It's like everyone is holding their breath." Carter nodded, but his mind wasn't on his crew. He was thinking about the Council. The fact that they had sent a message so soon after the Xeric fleet's failure showed just how much interest humanity was getting. But were they interested in peace, or were they just trying to understand what they were dealing with? "We'll be ready for anything," Carter said, his voice calm but firm. Lieutenant Harris nodded, but there was a hint of nervousness in her eyes. "Do you think they'll try to attack?" "I don't know," Carter admitted. "But whatever happens, we're not backing down." The meeting was set to take place in neutral space, far from any settled planets. The humans would be meeting with a group of council representatives from several major factions, including Xeric, Hydrax, and Yorn. These were some of the most powerful species in the galaxy. And now they were all curious about humanity. As they approached the designated coordinates, Carter watched as a fleet of ships began to appear on his sensors. First, a single ship from the Xeric Empire, then more, ships of various designs, representing the many factions that made up the Galactic Council. Together, they formed a vast, imposing fleet that dwarfed the small human ships. But Carter didn't feel afraid. He felt curious. This was the moment that could shape humanity's future in the galaxy. It was time to see what the Council really wanted. Once they were within range, a transmission came through, and the holographic image of the Xeric representative appeared. He was as stern as ever, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Human fleet, we are prepared to begin negotiations. You will dock with the Xeric flagship for a secure meeting. Follow our instructions carefully." Carter gave a nod. "Understood. We'll proceed." As the human fleet moved forward, they were guided to a large Xeric command ship. Its sleek design and imposing size made it clear that it was a symbol of power. The humans docked, and a team of officers led them into the heart of the ship, where the Council meeting would take place. Inside the Xeric flagship, the Council representatives were already gathered. The large, circular room was dimly lit, with holographic screens showing various star maps and data. The representatives sat at a long, oval table, each one with a unique appearance that reflected the diversity of the galaxy. Carter and his team were escorted to the far end of the room. He took a deep breath as he stepped forward. This was it, the meeting that would determine the future of humanity's place in the galaxy. "We are glad you could join us, Captain Carter," the Xeric representative said, his voice formal but colder than before. "You have caused quite a stir. Our fleets were humiliated by your forces, and now we seek to understand how." "We're not here to explain ourselves," Carter said, his voice calm but unwavering. "We're here to be treated as equals. Humanity has been left out of galactic politics for far too long, and it's time for that to change." The Xeric representative's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Instead, the Hydrax representative, a being with a long, flowing body and several eyes, leaned forward. "You're an interesting species, Captain. Your technology, your strategy, it's unlike anything we've seen before. And yet you come from a tiny planet, barely known to us. How did you develop this advanced technology?" Carter paused before answering. He had been briefed on what he could and couldn't reveal, but he had his own plan for how he would handle the situation. "Humanity has always been resourceful. Our technology is built on the lessons we've learned from the universe around us. We may be small, but we've never been afraid to think outside the box." The Yorn representative, a tall, reptilian figure with shimmering scales, chuckled. "Thinking outside the box. That's an understatement. You've put every one of us on alert with a fleet that we thought was a joke. But now we have to ask, what is it that you want?" Carter met the Yorn representative's gaze. "We don't want war. We don't want conflict. But we also won't bow to anyone. Humanity has its own place in this galaxy, and we intend to take it. We're not here to serve anyone. We're here to form partnerships and grow together." The room fell silent as the Council members exchanged looks. It was clear that Carter's words had made an impact. They hadn't expected such a direct answer. The humans weren't afraid to speak their minds, and that was something none of them had anticipated. After a long pause, the Xeric representative spoke again, his voice filled with calculation. "You claim that you don't want war, but we must ask, what happens if another faction challenges you? Will you fight back? Will you defend yourselves, or will you turn to us for protection?" Carter's gaze remained steady. "We will defend ourselves. We don't need anyone's protection. But we're willing to work together as equals, and we expect the same respect from you." The Council members exchanged glances once more, each of them considering Carter's words carefully. The silence was thick, and for a moment, it seemed as if the future of humanity in the galaxy hung in the balance. Finally, the Hydrax representative spoke. "Perhaps it's time for us to reevaluate our position. Humanity may be worth our attention after all." The meeting wasn't over, but the tone had shifted. The Council members no longer saw the humans as a mere curiosity. They saw them as something more, something to be taken seriously. The Council meeting had left a lasting impression on everyone aboard the human fleet. As Captain Carter made his way back to his flagship, the quiet buzz of conversations filled the halls. The crew was eager to know what had transpired in that tense room. Did they seem ready to listen? Lieutenant Harris asked as she walked beside Carter. Carter glanced over at her, his face calm, but his mind was still processing everything. They're interested, but they're also cautious. They've never had to deal with a species like us before. It's all about trust now. That's one way to put it, Harris muttered. It felt like they were waiting for us to make the first move. That's exactly what they were doing, Carter replied. The key is showing them we're not like the other species they've dealt with. We're not here to beg for their respect. We'll earn it, or we'll make our own way. The human fleet had always been underestimated. What the galaxy's major factions had failed to realize was that humanity's greatest strength wasn't just in technology or strategy. It was in the resolve of the people, in their ability to adapt and innovate. And that would be their most valuable asset in the coming days. The next few hours aboard the flagship were filled with preparations. Carter had ordered a full review of the fleet's systems and a final test of their newest technologies. The council meeting had proven that the galaxy was still trying to figure out humanity, but what they didn't know was that the humans had more surprises in store. As the fleet made its way to their next destination, a neutral zone on the edge of the galaxy, Carter couldn't shake the feeling that the council's interest wasn't entirely driven by curiosity. There was something else, something darker beneath the surface. He could sense it, and he wasn't alone. "Captain, I need to show you something," said Lieutenant Harris, her voice filled with urgency. Carter followed her to the bridge's command center, where a holographic display showed a map of the galaxy, with various sectors marked in different colors. "What's this?" Carter asked, eyeing the map closely. "We've been monitoring the fleet movements of the council factions," Harris explained. "I know they say they're here to negotiate, but these movements aren't just for show." The map revealed the presence of several large fleets on the edges of human space. Ships from the Xeric Empire, Hydrax, and even the Yorn had been making subtle but calculated shifts toward human territory. It was as if they were testing the waters, waiting for humanity to make a move. "This doesn't look like peace talks," Carter muttered, his brow furrowing. "It looks like they're trying to box us in." Harris nodded. "Exactly. It's like they're waiting to see if we'll flinch." Carter leaned forward, tapping a few keys on the console to zoom in on the fleet movements. "What are they up to?" "That's just it," Harris said, her voice tense. "We don't know yet, but I don't trust that they're giving us the space we need." The truth hit Carter like a cold blast of air. The council wasn't just negotiating. They were testing humanity's strength. They wanted to see how far they could push without triggering a full conflict. If the humans showed any sign of weakness, the council would strike, trying to either contain or dominate them. But Carter wasn't about to play into their hands. "Prepare the fleet for any scenario," he said, his voice firm. "We're going to make it clear that humanity isn't afraid of them. We'll be ready for anything." As he spoke, a communication came through from the flagship's communications officer. The screen flickered to life, showing the face of the Xeric representative from the council meeting. "We've been reviewing your fleet's movements, Captain Carter," the Xeric said, his voice cold. "We've noticed that you've become more mobile. I hope that's not a sign of aggression." Carter stood tall, his gaze unwavering. "It's a sign of preparedness. Humanity is not afraid of what's to come. We're ready to defend ourselves." The Xeric's lips curled into a tight smile. "I see. Well, we are monitoring the situation. Perhaps we'll meet again soon, and we can discuss our next steps." The communication ended abruptly, and Carter turned to his officers. "This isn't just about peace anymore," he said. "It's about survival. The council is pushing us, but they're also testing us. They want to know how far they can go." "What do we do?" Harris asked, her voice tinged with concern. "We stay strong. We don't show any signs of weakness," Carter replied. "We're going to show them that humanity is a force to be reckoned with. They'll learn that, when they challenge us, we don't back down." For the first time since their arrival in the galaxy, Carter allowed himself to feel a flicker of excitement. The humans had made it this far because they never gave up, never accepted defeat. Now, it was time to show the galaxy what humanity could do when it was pushed to the edge. The tiny fleet, once mocked and underestimated, was becoming a symbol of strength. Every move they made, every choice, would send ripples across the galaxy. And the Council, for all its power, would have to reckon with that. But the real question remained: would humanity be able to rise to the challenge, or would the pressure of the galactic stage break them before they had the chance to prove their worth? The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity had already begun to reshape the galaxy's power structure. And no one, not even the Council, could predict how the game would end. Captain Carter stood at the observation window of his flagship, staring out at the swirling stars. His mind raced with the implications of the Council's actions. They were still in the early stages of their diplomatic efforts, but he could feel the tension mounting. The galaxy's most powerful factions were now watching them, waiting for humanity to either rise or fall. It wasn't just about proving they were strong. It was about proving humanity's worth in a galaxy that had dismissed them as insignificant. Humanity's strength wasn't just in their weapons or their ships. It was in their unity, their drive, and their endless ability to adapt. The rest of the crew had noticed the shift in atmosphere. They were no longer seen as underdogs, but as an emerging power. And with that recognition came the pressure to maintain the image. One wrong move, one sign of weakness, and all their efforts could crumble. The galaxy was a harsh place, and the competition for power was fierce. "Captain," Harris said, breaking his thoughts as she walked up to him, "we've intercepted more signals from the Council's fleet. They're moving again. This time, they've increased their numbers." Carter didn't flinch, his eyes still fixed on the stars. "They're testing us again." "Yes, but they're getting closer. Our scouts report that the Xeric Empire has deployed additional forces to the Outer Rim. And the Hydrax. They're assembling their fleets too." "I thought we agreed we wouldn't make the first move," Carter said, turning to face her. "We're not making a move," Harris responded. "But they are, and they're making it clear that they expect us to back down. The question is, do we?" Captain Carter's jaw tightened. "No, we don't back down. Humanity doesn't do that." There was a brief silence between them, the weight of his words settling in. The decision had been made. Humanity would stand its ground. A few hours later, the flagship and its small fleet came to a halt at the edge of the neutral zone, near the borders of human space. It was an area where no faction had claimed dominance, a space between the stars where diplomacy was supposed to thrive. But with the Council's ships gathering nearby, it was becoming clear that this neutral space was no longer neutral at all. Harris and Carter stood side by side on the bridge, watching as the Xeric and Hydrax fleets took position just beyond the neutral zone's borders. They were waiting for humanity to blink. "Can we send a message?" Harris asked. "To show we're serious." Carter thought for a moment before nodding. "Yes, but it has to be something subtle. We can't show too much force, yet." He motioned to the communication officer. "Send a message to the Xeric representative. Make it clear that humanity will defend itself, but we're not looking for war." The communication officer hesitated, but then typed the message with precision. A few moments later, the screen flickered to life, showing the Xeric representative. His expression was unreadable, but his posture stiffened when he saw Carter. "We've received your message, Captain Carter," the Xeric said, his voice as cold as ever. "But it seems you're underestimating the strength of our fleets. A small fleet like yours cannot possibly hope to stand against us." Carter stood firm, refusing to show any signs of intimidation. "You underestimate us, Xeric. Our fleet may be small, but we have something you don't: the will to fight for what we believe in." The Xeric's eyes narrowed. "You've made your point, but don't mistake words for power. You're out of your depth here, Captain." Before Carter could respond, the screen went black. "Not the warmest reception," Harris said dryly. "No, but we didn't expect any favors," Carter replied. "The important thing is, we've sent the message. Let them think we're just a tiny fleet. Let them underestimate us. It'll make our next move all the more effective." As they awaited the next move from the council, the tension in the air thickened. The fleet was ready, and every officer aboard knew that what came next could change everything. Several hours later, the first sign of a true challenge came. The council's fleets moved. The Xeric Empire and Hydrax had aligned forces, and they were moving toward the human fleet at full speed. It was no longer just a matter of diplomacy. The council wanted to make a statement. "This is it," Harris said, looking up at the tactical display. "They're making their move." Carter nodded. "Let them. We're not afraid." With practiced efficiency, the crew of the flagship prepared for what might come next. The ship's engines hummed, and the rest of the fleet readied its weapon systems. This was not a battle yet, but the human fleet was determined to show the council that they were ready for anything. For years, humanity had been seen as insignificant, their tiny fleet a mere speck among the stars. But now, standing at the precipice of a new chapter, Captain Carter and his crew understood something that the council had yet to realize. The true strength of humanity lay not in their numbers, but in their spirit. The galaxy would soon learn what happened when humans were pushed too far. And the tiny fleet that had been mocked was about to show the universe just how much power could be packed into something small. The stars twinkled quietly in the vastness of space, but the tension within the human fleet was anything but quiet. Captain Carter stood at the helm of his flagship, looking out at the enormous formations of the Xeric and Hydrax fleets. His fleet, small but fiercely determined, was ready. It was a moment of truth, one that could define humanity's place in the galaxy forever. Harris walked up beside him, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "They're coming closer," she said. "The Xeric have closed their distance. The Hydrax aren't far behind." Captain Carter nodded, but his mind was already set on the next steps. He had a plan, and now was the time to execute it. The council expected a show of force, and humanity was prepared to deliver something they weren't expecting, a display of confidence, not just in their fleet, but in their unity and intelligence. "Ready all ships," Carter ordered, his voice calm but firm. "We're going to let them make the first move." As the enemy fleets approached, the human ships remained still, their engines powered down to a minimum. The silence in the cockpit was deafening. The crew stood ready, but the human fleet didn't flinch. They weren't backing down. The Xeric Empire's flagship, massive and imposing, loomed ahead. The Hydrax fleet was equally impressive, their ships sleek and fast. Yet, for all their power, both fleets remained uncertain, watching humanity's fleet with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "They're waiting for us to make the first move," Harris observed. "What do we do now?" "We wait," Captain Carter said, his eyes scanning the enemy ships. "Patience is a weapon too. They think we're too small to challenge them. Let's keep it that way. Let them underestimate us." The enemy fleets slowed their advance as they neared the human fleet, and then, without warning, the Xeric flagship transmitted a challenge. The message flashed across the screens of every human ship. "Human fleet, you are outnumbered. Surrender now, or face complete destruction." The crew looked to Captain Carter for a response. For a moment, it seemed like the end of the line for humanity. But Captain Carter's eyes remained steady. He smiled faintly, knowing this was exactly what he had hoped for. Without hesitation, he pressed a button, sending a message to the Xeric flagship. "Humanity does not surrender. We fight for our survival. But we fight with intelligence, not just brute force." The Xeric fleet hesitated. It was a subtle challenge, but a challenge nonetheless. The Hydrax fleet, still at a distance, observed quietly, unsure of what would happen next. Carter had expected this moment, but what came next was unexpected. Suddenly, a bright flash filled the screen. A small, seemingly insignificant ship, one that the Council's fleets had ignored, zoomed forward at an incredible speed, crossing the space between the fleets in a matter of moments. It was a human scout ship, and it launched a single, perfectly timed missile toward the Xeric flagship. The missile was small, but it was designed with technology far beyond what the Council had imagined. It was a disruption device, one that would momentarily cripple the Xeric flagship's systems. The missile hit its target, and the Xeric flagship's engines sputtered as their shields flickered out of existence. "What is this?" the Xeric representative on the communication screen demanded. "What have you done?" "It's a reminder," Carter replied calmly, "that we have more than just firepower. We have the will, the ingenuity, and the knowledge to adapt and overcome. You may have the numbers, but we have the will to fight. And that will is what you will never fully understand." The human fleet had used their technology in ways the Council had never anticipated. The Xeric were used to overwhelming their enemies with sheer force. They had never expected a small fleet, outnumbered and outgunned, to turn their own arrogance against them. And the Hydrax fleet, watching from a distance, was starting to understand that perhaps humanity wasn't as weak as they had thought. The Xeric flagship struggled to regain its balance, but the damage was done. The Hydrax, sensing an opportunity, began to move forward, but the humans were ready for them. In a flash, the human fleet's coordinated maneuvering surprised the Hydrax, sending their ships into disarray. The tide had turned. The human fleet was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for something bigger: respect. They were showing the galaxy that size didn't matter. It was how you used your strength, your intelligence, and your unity that defined you. As the enemy fleets retreated, their leaders baffled by the sudden turn of events, Captain Carter watched the human ships hold their ground. The message had been sent, and the universe had received it loud and clear. "This is just the beginning," Carter muttered, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "Humanity may be small, but we've proven that we can stand tall." The tiny fleet that had once been mocked had now shown the galaxy that it was a force to be reckoned with. And in the quiet of space, as the last remnants of the enemy fleets disappeared into the distance, Captain Carter knew that humanity had finally earned its place among the stars. The galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again.